Hi, welcome to What's the Point? I'm Bill Ellis, your host. Each week I talk with people about the moments that shaped them, the choices that changed them, and what those stories might spark in you. And with that said, let's get into today's conversation. Have you ever found yourself in something that's working? It's just not really working for you? From the outside, it makes sense. You've made good decisions, you've progressed, you've built something, yet there's a part of you that just isn't fully in it anymore. Not enough to walk away necessarily, but enough that you can't quite ignore it either. So what do you do with that? Do you stay because it still works? Or do you change without being sure what comes next? I'm Bill Ellis, your host here at What's the Point? Welcome. My guest today is Julian Lighton. Julian has built a career across strategy, leadership, and coaching, working at senior levels inside global organizations, including Cisco and Hitachi, and stepping into chief strategy officer roles multiple times. His path hasn't followed a single straight line. It's taken him across different functions, industries, and environments, each requiring a shift in how he thinks and operates. Today, he works as an executive coach, supporting people as they navigate some of the most difficult moments in their careers and lives, often when things look successful on paper but no longer feel quite right. He's written a book based on his experience, and it's called Navigating Your Next. And talking about that will help us help you, listeners, get insight on everything I've just talked about. Are you in the right place? Do you move? Do you stay? Julian, welcome.
Well, thank you very much, Bill. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm looking very much forward to this conversation, and I'm sure my listeners are as well. But let's start at the beginning. Let's start with you, Julian. You're originally trained in law, right? What were you thinking at that point? Why, and did it feel like the right path for you?
Yeah. So, as an adolescent, as a young kid, I wanted to be a barrister. I did undergrad and postgrad law at Oxford, and then another degree in comparative law, and eventually decided that I didn't want to practice. So I liked the concept, I liked the academics of law, but I didn't want to be a practitioner, mostly because back in those days, Bill, being a barrister in the UK was pretty much a dead man's shoes operation. What I mean by that is, you joined a chambers and you stayed in that same organization for the rest of your life. So you can imagine that, at the age of 24, signing up to basically be in the same building and working with the same set of people for the next 35, 40 years was not necessarily 100% attractive to someone who's a little bit more entrepreneurial. And so I decided to change, and I went to work for an organization that was essentially a startup in the days when there were no startups in the UK.
Let me ask you a quick question for clarification. How long were you in that barrister role? And what happened and when did you realize that it wasn't that you wanted to stay?
Well, so I did. So in the UK, what happens is you do undergrad, and then you have to do a postgrad where you learn either to be a solicitor, so someone who deals with everything outside of the court, or a barrister who actually is an advocate who stands up in court. And I didn't do that part. So I was signed up to go to a place called Gray's Inn and do my barrister training, and I decided not to go.
Well, if nothing else, that's interesting. I always get confused when I hear folks from outside the U.S. talk about barrister versus solicitor. So thank you for that clarification. I find it very interesting. Here we just have attorneys, as you all know, having been here for a while. So what was your first real move? You just said your real move was moving to a startup before they had startups. How did that come about? What was that situation?
Total, total chance. So much of my career, as we are going to learn as we talk about this, is about being opportunistic, but
Mm.
opportunistic in terms of thinking about progress rather than progression.
Mm.
Okay. So in this particular case, I didn't know what I wanted to do. Yeah. But I could tell you what I didn't want to do. So I knew that I didn't want to be a lawyer, either a solicitor or a barrister. I didn't want to be a banker, and on and on and on. And so I went to a party, and a girlfriend of mine introduced me to a couple of guys who were putting together this company. I was the former head of distribution for BMW Europe, and a Stanford psychologist, and a guy that had been a BBC TV presenter who was also one of the early kind of experimenters with building enterprise level coding. We're talking about 1990 here. Okay. And they were trying to put together a firm that would look at sales, marketing, and distribution problems for companies. And I was just kind of fascinated. I knew nothing about business, and this sounded like an interesting thing to do. And so I signed up, and away we went, having no background whatsoever in software, in sales, marketing, distribution, or in business.
Well, we'll talk more about that as we go along because that's not the last time you kind of took something on faith and based on interest. So, but now might be a good time. So, how did you get introduced to that group of entrepreneurs, and how did they embrace you, someone without experience, as you just said?
Yeah. So, kind of a merry band of warriors, right? This is back in the days when software is in its early days, right? You've got to
Okay.
remember that 1985 was really the first commercially available PC with any kind of desktop software. And so by 1990, you've got a bunch of people who are trying to figure out a set of problems to do with that market. So these guys essentially said, look, there are a bunch of outlets that sell things, either computers or cars or any other number of items. Wouldn't it be interesting if we could map marketing spend to those outlets on a geographic basis and understand what moves the bar in terms of increasing sales or not? And now I knew nothing about any of this, but I was a smart guy. And they're like, okay, well, we're going to have three pieces to this business. We're going to have a research piece, which essentially is going to be a bunch of students sitting in a room using a CATI system to call these distributors and ask them about their businesses. We're going to have a set of people who are going to take that information and process it and turn it into files that we're going to upload into a set of software, essentially an executive information system that would look at that data on a geographic distribution basis. And then we're going to have a bunch of consultants who are going to look at those set of findings and provide a set of recommendations to our clients. And we want you to be in that third category. And because you're a smart guy and we can train you how to do this, like you don't have to know anything, but we'll show you how to take a look at channel balance and channel effectiveness and sales models and marketing models and apply them. And what we want you to do is basically take this. And in those days, it was luggables, Bill. Like you're not dealing with a laptop. You had to actually pick up like a giant block and put it
Mm-hmm.
in a suitcase and get in a car or get on a plane and take it to someone and unpack it and show them and walk them through the information. And so that's what I learned how to do for a couple of years. And it was an incredible background, an incredible baseline in learning these three disciplines, which have then gone on throughout my career, right? My interest in information services and analytics, to be able to look at these things. What do you do with return path data? How do you think about analyzing it? And what do you do about either operating it and using it to increase the value of something or consulting about it? And so by complete chance, I ended up doing something that I've then utilized over the last 30 years, multiple ways in multiple instantiations of my career.
So you just wrap that up a little bit and how it became real in your life as you move forward. Excuse me. From there, your career progressed, and I'd like you to give us a little explanation of uh, what you talk about progress versus progression.
Mhm. Okay, so let's define the two things. So progress, you and I are old enough to remember the trades as they really were, right? So you would learn to be a carpenter or an electrician, and you would start as an apprentice, and then you would become a journeyman, and then finally you would become a master electrician, carpenter, etc. Okay, and throughout that, that would be progress and progression. Progress because your progression in those trades was dependent upon how good you were,
Mm.
right? You had to actually pass some kind of certification. You had to be judged by your peers. And so there was a gated progress, right? And this had been going on since the guilds hundreds of years ago. So you have these ideas of you need to progress in terms of how good you are, and that allows you progression in your career, title, money, applause, etc., etc. Okay, so you've got these two parallel concepts. They've become decoupled in people's careers now over the last 20, 25 years. So now everybody worries about progression, right? How much money am I going to be paid? What's my title? What's my authority? What's my influence? Social media? Am I going to get applause and likes, etc.? So everyone's fascinated by progression, but the idea of progress has kind of drifted away. The idea of being a master at something.
Mm.
How good are you at pricing? How good are you at go-to-market? How good are you at strategy? Right. And so I came from a point, law, very similar, right? Progress and progression,
Mhm.
where I wanted to think about myself. What am I getting good at? Right. What is it that is distinctive about me? What's my brand? What's my identity in terms of how people would understand me? And so a lot of the career moves that I've made have been not about progression, but have been about progress, right? How do I get the opportunity to learn more, to be
Mhm.
with a different mentor, to get access to different development areas, different skills, such that I can actually track my progress and say to
Mhm.
other people, hey, look, I'm distinctively good at this thing. Yeah. And so I went from this small little startup in the UK called Gödel Escherbach, named after the eponymous book by Thomas Hofstadter. And I went to work for Andersen Consulting, the giant American
Mhm.
consulting company of the time that and now is Accenture. And I was one of the first five guys in their strategy function in the US. And I did that because I'd met up with some of the partners. We were working on a common
Mhm.
client, IBM. We were looking at their peripherals and they were looking at their main computer business. And they got to see me do my
Okay.
stuff, right? Around sales, marketing, distribution, analysis. And they said, hey, we really like you. Why don't you come and do that? But you can do it on a bigger scale and you can see the whole pie. So instead of just this little piece that you're working on, you can look at whole enterprises and you can look at all of their business problems, sales, marketing, strategy, corporate development, finance, et cetera, et cetera. And so I spent nearly 5 years working for Andersen Consulting
Let
in
me
Western Europe
interrupt you
doing
just for a
strategy.
minute here, if I may, please. My apologies, but I think it's very important to make a point. You are very in depth now in the world of business, although you said you started with no knowledge there, and you have progressed in your knowledge, and there has been a progression in your career as well. But I want to make the point for listeners that what Julian is talking about is applicable regardless of career. It does not, you do not have to be an entrepreneur. You do not have to be in business. You do not have to be in software. But you talked about the trades. You can be working to become a master electrician. You can be a nurse. You can be anything at all. And all of these principles make sense. So I just invite the listeners to say, how does this relate to me? Not
Yeah.
specifically, but how does that concept relate to me? So thank you for letting me expand on that and get back to your progression.
Oh, no, and Will, you're mentioning something very important, and it's at the heart of this idea. There's a lot of chaos in the market today, right? A lot of disruption. And that disruption is caused by demographics, it's caused by economics, it's caused by technology, AI, robotics, a number of other things that are turning different stages of careers. But one way of staying constant, of understanding that, is a really great question that I was posed by a McKinsey partner some 25, 30 years ago now, which is what is the discussion that should never happen without you in the room?
Mm.
Do you think about that, whether you're an architect, whether you're a carpenter, whether you're a salesperson, right? It's the definitional thing of what am I so good at
Mm-hmm.
that there should not be, right, a conversation without me in that room. Yep. And so I have thought of my career, certainly for the last 25 odd years. But before then, this kind of was a little light bulb that went off for me was this is what I was doing, was I was trying to become as good as I possibly could be at a small number of things that were so high value that it allowed me to have control, proactive control of my career. And so I had a North Star, right? Of I want to do these things, and I want to do these things not because of passion, but because of competency,
Mm-hmm.
right? I do them and I do them well. And because I do them well, I have confidence. And because I do them well, I have identity. And because I do them well, I have compensation. I have progression. Yeah. But I have a way to control my own speed because I have focus and discipline.
That's an interesting concept that you just laid out, Julian, and I'm going to do my best to kind of bring back to you what I heard you say, and that is that working on competence then built your confidence, and I'm wondering how much did it start for you or with all your clients to start with something where they feel like they have just really a burning desire, a purpose, it's something that's driving them, as opposed to, is it possible, do people just say, you know what, I can become the best, fill in the blank, and I don't really care about it, but there's an opportunity for me to be the best.
So I think there are like three perspectives on this. One, based upon my own experience, both in my career and of what I've observed about people who are successful. And one is a relatively recent thing based on you looking at the market and understanding what's really happening. And one I think is just a truism. So the first one is people who are successful, and I think this is universally true, know what they want.
Mm.
Right? It's almost impossible to get what you want, to be successful without knowing what you want. You can be lucky, right? There are a few individuals who undoubtedly are in the right place at the right time and they just get incredibly lucky, but that is a very, very small percentage of people. The vast majority, 90% plus, I would say, of people who are successful know what they want.
Mm.
So how do you know what you want? Well, you mentioned two completely polar opposite ways of doing it. One is passion, right? I deeply care about this thing. And the other one is competency, is what am I good at? Now, I would tell you that the vast majority, again, of people that I have experienced, the Bill Gateses, the John Chambers, the Mark Zuckerbergs, all of those guys, plus most of the corporate executives, do not do it because of passion. They do it because they figure out that they're really good at something and they just do that thing and they're really, really focused on it. Okay. So the first observation is, although you can be successful in passion and you can have a great life driven by passion, will not disagree in any way. Experience tells me that that is probably not the most successful route to getting what you want. Right? The most successful, the most obvious, the most pragmatic, practical route is to follow competency, what you're good at. Okay? Because what you're good at then tells you what you can get paid for. And it gives you an ability to map, how do I get better at this thing? And how do I understand myself in terms of my own confidence and competence? And it's an identity question as well, Bill, right? Particularly for men, what we do is who we are.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And so being able to identify yourself as something you are good at becomes a self-fulfilling identity question. So that I think is the first thing to observe. The second thing to observe.
And that speaks directly to what I've talked about from the time this show started, what I talk about with clients, what I talk about in general, and that is very simply, passion is great, but to me, passion's not the starting point. That's why this show is called What's the Point? What's the point is, what do you want to accomplish? Simon Sinek calls it your why. But
Yes.
it's similar to what you're saying, which is, what am I trying to accomplish? And then you go, what am I good at to get there? Passion to me is fuel. It's but it runs out at times. We always had to figure out how to refuel, and passion to me is more tenuous than purpose.
So much more so. So I'll come on to this in the third point that I'm going to make. So the first point, I completely agree with you. And by the way, Scott Galloway would say the same thing, as would Daniel Pink, as would a number of Adam Grant would say the same thing, that basically figuring out what you're good at and practicing, yes, developing the habits, the behaviors that make you successful is really the thing that you want. So you got to know what you want and you got to practice it. So number two, what's changed over the last few years is that you can become an expert in almost anything in a year. That didn't used to be true 25 years ago, right? Because of AI, because of the tools that are available, because of the content, the courses that are available, you can go from knowing nothing to being in the top 10% on the planet in just about anything in a year, right? If you want to, and you want to work hard at it, it's available to you. That was not clearly true, even 10 years ago. And so your ability to chart your own progress, right, to develop competency, to get good at something is a lot more available to you. So you posed a question at the beginning of this conversation about, should I stay or should I go? How do I know? Well, one of the superpowers is curiosity, is you don't have to leave anymore. You can do something, right? In terms of pursuing what you are interested in, what you might be good at, as a way of lengthening the runway to get to the next thing. So we'll talk about this. We'll come back to this in a second. But there's this key thing of, if you know what you want, it's now more available to you than it's ever been in history.
True.
Third thing, and you brought this up, Bill, and I think it's absolutely crucial, is just do it, right? Doing is being. There's an odd thing for human beings that we are what we do, and that we learn by doing, and that our identity changes by what we do and who we spend our time with. And so the process of going from not knowing to knowing, or of progressing, is about that process of doing. So famous is this that, Nike, just do it. Right. And what that talks to is not motivation. There is no motivation that I'm aware of that will get you up at 5 o'clock in the morning to go running in the wind and the snow and the rain. But there is discipline, right? And what you're pointing to is, when you say passion, is discipline. It's a bargain with yourself. So most of the most successful people, again, that I have ever met or worked with are incredibly focused. They know how to say no to other things, and they're very disciplined. And by discipline, they understand responsibility, that no one else is coming to save them. No one is coming to do it for them, right? They are going to have to do it all. And they make a bargain with themselves, with their future identity, that I can go from here to here. Yeah. And the discipline of getting up every morning to do it, to go and practice and become what you want to be. That's the thing that makes you, right, really successful in the long term, is that way of being that takes you from where you are to where you want to be. And that can be in job, it can be out of job, it could be as an entrepreneur, it can be as a musician, it can be any walk of life.
And as I look at your example, Julian, I think there have been a lot of different considerations that have motivated slash caused slash led to, whatever the right word is, moving on. So in your situation, have you ever been in a place that you thought, this is it, man, this is where I need to be? And then something happened, something changed, or something new came along and you went, oh, maybe that's not it. Or something and this is maybe just saying the same thing a different way, but something that looked right on paper, but just didn't feel right to you.
Sure. 100%, Bill. I mean, whilst I completely believe in being proactive and being responsible, I also believe in opportunity. And opportunity can show itself in two ways, as you're pointing out. It can be, look, there's something new and exciting, a way to develop, or it can be the avoidance of something. And there have been several times in my career where I've taken an opportunity and I didn't know that it was going to work out. So, for instance, going to Cisco was a great example. A great company, a phenomenal management team. I had no idea whether I was going to be successful. Back in 2001, I'd written an article when I was at McKinsey about new business models, essentially companies that organize themselves as networks, unbundling themselves in order to be able to take advantage of other companies' capabilities. Cisco was one of these, right? It designed products, it marketed them, it sold them, but it no longer manufactured them or did any warehousing or logistics. It mostly sold through channels, et cetera, et cetera. And I've written this article. An old partner of mine had got it in front of John Chambers, and John loved it and asked me to come in for lunch and talk to his management team. And I thought nothing more of it other than just I was talking about this article that I'd written. And 2 weeks later, I get called up by his assistant and asked to come in. And he says, "Look, I've got a problem. I need to figure out how to be more influential in our clients, in our customers. We don't really show up until the purchasing order. And I need to be in the same room as Accenture and PwC and IBM and all these guys. And I need you to figure out how to build a consulting company for me. And so is that something you're interested in?" Like, yeah, of course, John.
Let me think
Absolutely.
about that.
I had no idea how to do that. Right? Absolutely no idea. But fake it till you make it. Right? It's like, this is a great opportunity. Even if I fall flat on my face, this is something you can't turn down. And so I spent the next kind of about 12 years working for Cisco, either running P&Ls or running geographies or as a functional leader, and pure chance, right? It's amazing how things open up. On the other hand, a different example, I worked for several companies that were portfolio companies of different private equity firms. It was just really obvious that the CEOs had no intention whatsoever of transforming the underlying assets. Right? In my mind, there are really kind of three models of CEO. There are iconoclasts like a Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, Jobs, etc., who want to change the industry. There are CEOs who are competitive, like a John Chambers, like I want to win, I want to be number one. Jamie Dimon be another good example. And then there are defensive CEOs who basically want to, like, everything should just run and we want to be okay. And I want to stay in my job and I don't want to too much fuss and too much, et cetera, et cetera. Well, so I ran into several of those number three CEOs, and they're just, from my perspective, really difficult to work with. And figuring out that you're in that situation. So you mentioned at the beginning of the broadcast, the podcast, how do you know? So I think there's a little acid test of kind of three elements for me
Okay.
that I've developed over the years. One is, am I learning anything? Right? Am I really developing? Is it progress, or did I just do it for the money?
Mm-hmm.
And a couple of times I did it for the money and the title, and that turned out to be a very bad idea. So don't do that. Number two is context. There's a context you're good in. There's a location, right? If you drop me down in the middle of Africa or the middle of China or the middle of India, I would struggle. But in San Francisco, New York, Chicago, LA, Seattle, I'm fine, right? London, great. So there's a location, there's a size of company, right? Startup, scale up, large scale. I'm not great in small startups. Scale ups, a lot of what I do now, and obviously large scale companies, I've been very successful. So I work in those areas. Size of team, I am better in small teams than I am in large teams. Just, I like relationship. I like being able to work with some people. So contextually, the older you get, the more at bats you have, the more you begin to understand what context fits for you. So what competence do I have? What context do I have? And lastly, culture. As human beings, we're all tribal, right? You and I experience each other as a series of values. Am I kind? Am I curious? Am I honest? Am I persistent? Am I consistent? And so we decide whether we're assonant or dissonant. And so culture is a really important thing, because all of the first few interviews you go into are about competence. Can you do the job? But over time, it's about fit, how
Mm.
you do the job that makes you successful. So your little kind of decoder ring, right, is A, am I learning anything? Am I developing? B, am I in the right context? Like, does this feel good? Kind of Goldilocks, right?
Mm-hmm.
Lastly, am I with the right tribe? Right? Do these people want to support me? Do they want to help me grow? Am I enjoying myself? Is my lived experience good or bad? And so I think you can answer that question that you posed at the beginning of the podcast pretty succinctly, which is either this or this. And if it's not this, then, you can lengthen the runway by thinking about what I'm going to be good at and how I get to that before jumping to the next thing.
Going back to something you said around that time of our conversation, Julian, you said knowing what you don't want or knowing what you're not good at. To me, I find that to be as effective, if not more so, for people getting into the right culture, getting into the right geography, getting into the right everything. Because when we compromise and accept things that are on our, boy, I wish I didn't do that list, it can get pretty uncomfortable pretty quickly. Let me take a quick detour here. Tell us the story of moving from the UK to the US, in particular San Francisco, because that I don't want to just take that for granted. That was a pretty significant move, I think.
Yeah, great story. So I was working at Anderson in Paris, and the last role that I had there was as a project program manager, and I was managing a strategy and transformation project for the company itself. So Anderson back in those days was divided into giant geographic business units: US, Europe, Asia, Latin America, etc. And within Europe, it was going from individual national practices to a combined set of regional models. And in doing that, it was splitting supply and demand. So the partners were going to be responsible for demand, and you were going to have these giant supply groups of consultants split by competency. Okay. And my job was literally to get on a plane on a Monday morning out of Paris to go to Amsterdam, Amsterdam to Denmark, Denmark to Germany, et cetera, and go around and talk to groups of partners and try and walk them through how this thing was going to work. You can imagine, like, I was 27, 28 years old, and I just got the crap beaten out of me by these grumpy old guys who had no wish to give up control or to talk to me. Like, who was I to walk into their corner office and
Hmm.
start to tell them about what the future was going to be? So after 6 months of doing this, I was pretty tired and pretty worn out, and had been pretty badly beaten up, despite having a somewhat thick skin. And I said to my boss, I'm just going to take some time off. Okay. I'm not going to do this anymore. And when I come back, we're going to talk about what it is I am going to do. But I'm going to go see my cousin in San Francisco. Okay. And so my uncle had been a very successful businessman and became a real estate investor in San Francisco. And I went out to see my cousin. This is the summer of 94. And it was not difficult, I will tell you, to figure out that the streets were metaphorically, if not literally, paved with technology gold in 1994. I mean, you think the AI revolution is huge now. In those days, you were dealing with the client server, desktop, software revolution, the massive proliferation of devices, the very beginning of the mobile period. And so you show up in San Francisco and you could fall out of a cab and get a job. The demand, like, if you're relatively bright and you got a little bit of a background. So what I did is I showed up on holiday and I spent 6 weeks kind of wandering around, and I ended up standing on a beach, Muir Beach, just north of San Francisco in Marin, looking back at the city. And it's a beautiful, like, late August day. And I'm like, yeah, okay, I'm coming here.
Yeah.
Just forget London. No, 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 no. No, I'm coming here. And so what I did was I went back to London and I got a telephone directory, because that's things existed like that in the day. Had to go to the library, telephone directory because the internet didn't even exist in those days,
Right.
right? Get a telephone directory for San Francisco, and I pulled all of the top 250 businesses. I looked at the San Francisco Chronicle, and I pulled all the names and addresses, and I hand typed letters to these 250 businesses and I stuck him in the mail. And I said, I'm going to be back in San Francisco in 6 weeks' time. If you're interested, let me know and I'll show up for an interview. So sent out 250 of these things, arrived at 10 interviews in 2 weeks and got two great job offers. And another 6 weeks after that, I moved lock, stock, and barrel, got married, bought a house, bought a car, changed jobs, all within 6 weeks.
And I'm
Again,
sure
I
you
didn't know
didn't
what I
have a
was
car in
doing.
London.
No car in London. But yeah, I just showed up, and it's a it's an adventure. Now I may be a little bit more accepting of risk than some people,
Yeah.
but to me, it was a really no regrets move. Right? It's an adventure. It was an incredible story of once again, I was going to be doing something. So from a career point of view, I decided to join a management consultancy. So I was going to do the same
Mhm.
thing as I've been doing in London, management consultancy, but I was going to be doing it for tech companies in the Valley. And I was going to be running my own little business. So they had hired me to run the San Francisco office with about 50 people. I'd never had a team bigger than
Mhm.
like 6 or 7 people. So I went from running projects and running 6 or 7 people to running an organization, 50
Yeah.
odd people being responsible for P&L. And the line that goes between them was I knew how to sell and deliver consulting projects, right?
Now,
But I
see,
took a risk, took a jump.
and I think that's the point that I hope his listeners take from this. I, by example, am not as I'm more risk averse than you. So to take that kind of leap is not something I've ever felt comfortable doing. However, not taking a leap at all, not stepping out of my comfort zone, is not going to allow me to, your words, progress. And when I'm able, and when I think most people are able to get over the fear, at least a little bit, anywhere from you just said, I'm going to a different country, a different city, and I'm doing it this way. Even if it's just sticking our toe in the water, getting out of what our normal thing is opens up a lot of different possibilities. In your case, what really caught you to feed your story back to you was the beauty and everything that San Francisco represented to you. And oh, by the way, what I want to do and what I'm good at is right here, and there's a lot of it.
So,
When
so,
when
so
you
the,
get to navigating your next, for those people, sorry, when you speak to people that are kind of like feeling like they need to move but have some fear or aren't that big of risk takers, what's your advice to them?
yeah. Well, let's use that exact example. Okay. So it wasn't just being drawn forward by what I desired. I was also deciding what am I not prepared to be anymore.
Mm.
So remember the story,
Yes.
Bill, of I was tired of getting on a plane every day, of being away from
Mm.
my future wife, of being beaten up by grumpy old men. And I'm like, I'm just not prepared to be that thing anymore. I'm not prepared to do that. And so, as much as I was drawn towards something, I was also repelled by something. So, a super important conversation to have with yourself, right? A question to answer for yourself, for all of your listeners, is what am I not prepared to be anymore?
Mhm.
Yeah. One of the things that gets you unstuck is I'm just,
Oh,
it's that old, like 1970s film, like, I'm not going to take it anymore.
yeah.
Well, you have to be able to look at yourself and say, again, there's no one coming to rescue me. I am responsible. And so if I don't like this, then I have to do something about it. Now, it's better to run to something than run away from something. And so knowing what you want, right, is a much better positive,
Mhm.
set of purposeful actions that you can take. So what do you do? But when I sit down with people who are frustrated, again, back to the beginning of our conversation, very often what you need to help them understand is it's not going to change unless you change.
Mm.
Right? How's that working for you? Is another great question.
Mhm.
Well, it's not. Well, if you don't decide to do something different, it's going to stay the same. And so doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result is just madness.
Mm.
So I don't think, you're mad. And I don't think that, you want this frustration or this pain. And so you need to do something different. So let's have a conversation about what it is you actually really want that's not this. Yeah. And that can be any number of different possibilities.
Mhm.
Then you can go through a rational, right, process of looking at those possibilities, applying some constraints and applying some desires, and get down to a much more positive outlook of, okay, that's what I want. And that's the path that I want to take to be able to get there. But it starts with seeing things in a negative relief, as you were saying, right? What is it that I don't want
Mhm.
for myself or my family, right? What am I not prepared to do anymore? What am I not prepared to be? If you can answer that question, it gives you the momentum
Mhm.
to be able to be something else. And then the question is what?
And what I hear my take on what you've said, and we've had several conversations on this, is I think it's best that we don't look at it as we're running away from something per se. But what I found over time is if I'm being held back by my own constraint, my fear of risk not working out, it would be good for me to ask myself, as you said, how's it working for you now? What's everything you have that is making you miserable now? So, do you want to stay there? You can consider it running away, or you can say, I'm going to progress. And by progressing, I want to move someplace where these things don't occur. But then the other thing you've said, which is critical, what are the things you want? And it's rarely money at the bottom line, but it might be a different environment. It might be a different culture. It might be a new way of learning, right? Is that kind of what I'm hearing you say?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, so for me, it goes back to answering these three questions. Like, what am I going to be doing?
Mhm.
Competency, right? And am I going to be learning something? Am I just re-experiencing myself over and over again? Personally, I don't like doing that. Many people say that's great, right? I'm comfortable. I want to do the same thing over and over again. For
Mhm.
me, I want to grow. I want to progress. I want to develop. So my first question is, what am I actually going to be doing? What's my lived experience day to day? What am I doing? So it's clearly different being a strategist versus an operator, a GM,
Mhm.
versus being an entrepreneur, et cetera, et cetera. They're very different existences. Okay. So competency is one. Second is in what context again? So help me understand, am I working for Cisco, 50 billion plus? Am I working for $1 billion revenue company at TiVo? Am I working for a small startup, Gainsight, etc.? What do I want? Right?
Mhm.
What's the environment I want to be in? What's the location I want to work out of? So I changed location. I changed size
Mhm.
of company. And then lastly, who do I want to work with? We spend 90,000 hours on our career, Bill. That's a third of your life. Do you want to hang out with complete idiots, you know, butt heads throughout that time? No, you don't, right? You don't. You actually want friends and you want to have a good time and you want to be in a place that appreciates you and that rewards you and that gives you opportunity. So proactively go select that, right? Don't
Mhm.
hang out with people that are going to hold you
Yeah.
back and that are going to be difficult. And I think by answering those three sets of questions, you get a lot of clarity as to what it is you actually want. Of course, the first way you can answer it is what you don't want,
Mhm.
right? So I don't want to do a repetitive thing, doing the same thing as I'm doing today. I don't want to work for the same size of company, right? In the same location. And I don't want to have a bunch of people who don't support me. Great. Okay. So just don't do that.
Mhm.
Right? So what is it that you actually do
Yeah.
want? Use that to be able to start to pave the way and take meaningful, purposeful actions to get what you want.
And under the topic you just brought up, Julian, of meaningful and purposeful actions, you know, some people doing the same thing don't look at it as I'm doing the same thing as monotony necessarily. But what does that do for them? And you touched on it maybe in a little bit different perspective earlier when you said you wanted to spend more time with your wife and that. sometimes being in a position of doing the same thing over and over, if it's not miserable and you're not with a bunch of what you call butt heads, or where you do butt heads, however you want to look at that, as long as it's not so miserable that you're miserable, it can free you up to do things like be there every night to coach your son or daughter in the sport or activity. So there's some benefit to that. And I bring that up not to be contrary, but I just bring that up to show how broadly applicable what you're saying and navigating your next is. It may not be right for you, but for the person that it is, navigate your next based on that.
100%. So many of the most peaceful, most happy people that I've met have pretty balanced lives,
Mm.
right? And are actually very happy being specialists. So, we brought up before the kind of cabinet maker. I
Mm.
always want, when I was growing up, I'm terrible with my hands. I'm absolutely useless, can barely change a light bulb. But I was always really jealous of those people that could make things.
Mm.
Because at the end of the day, it's a beautiful thing, right? You can create, whether you're a painter or a cook or a cabinet maker. At the end of the day, you've got something that is real that's in the world. And so I always would have loved to have been one of those people that could go to a workshop every day and pursue a craft and get really good at it and be able to then, walk away from it. Like, but most of the cabinet makers or furniture makers or painters that I've ever met do not lie awake and tortured at 2 o'clock in the morning, worrying about P&Ls or about the interpersonal conflict they have with their boss or their colleagues, right? They have a much better balanced life and they get to share their time with their spouse or their partner or their children or their animals or their hobbies. And so I 100% agree with you. You know, you want a life, not just a job. Remember we said the 90,000 hours?
Mhm.
Well, there's two other thirds of that, right? There's 90,000 hours in your career. There's, still, 180,000 hours, right, of other stuff that's not career. When it comes down to it, you've got 168 hours a week. So take out the sleep, take out the eating, and that's the amount of time that you have to make a conscious decision. Because again, you're responsible. Nobody
Mhm.
else is coming to do it for you. How do you want to budget that time? Because it comes down to how you spend the day, the week, the month, the quarter, the
Mhm.
year. And that cumulative is what makes you. And so the choice is, how do I want to spend my time? Right? The what I want is, again, what am I going to do? Doing is being is doing for human beings. So what am I going to spend my time
Mhm.
doing? The choice is, do I want to be sitting in an office being yelled at, or do I want to do something else? The choice is yours. My book is not prescriptive. But Daniel Pink, Simon Sinek, all those guys, wonderful, incredibly talented. They tend to be much more telling you what you should be like. So Simon,
Mhm.
be like a Marine leader, commander, right?
Mhm.
I'm not trying to tell you what you should be. What I'm trying to do is outline how you can get what you want. How do you become conscious enough to know what you want? How do you outline your value proposition? Why me? How do you go and talk to other people so that you can leverage what you know and how you know to get what you want? And then how do you make sure that you're actually getting the right thing, managing success? Because again, most of the people I know who've been most successful are deeply unhappy people,
Mhm.
right? So the real problem is beware success because you might actually get it. You in order to be able to be successful, you have to focus and you have to have discipline. And focus and discipline requires you to say no to things. That can be no to friends, or no to hobbies, or no to fitness, or no to your spouse, or no to your children. Over time, these things add up and they have consequences. So you got to be very careful that,
Mhm.
you don't end up with a bunch of unintended outcomes from trying to get what you want. So you got to really look at, back to the conversation we were just having. What is it that I actually want? Do I want a
Mhm.
balanced life, or do I want real intense career success and climbing the ladder and to be like the one expert on a particular thing. You can't have both.
Let me ask you one more question because we're getting right up against the time you've committed, and I know you're super busy. I've talked a lot about people making a move in the face of risk, in the face of looking at the downside that can happen. What would you say to someone that finally says, I'm going to go for it here, and it doesn't work out? And I knew it, and they feel like they're not only back to square one, but back to square minus one. What comes next? What would you tell someone, Julian, to say, yeah, it's not a failure, it's a lesson type of thing? What's your advice there?
Well, I think you've just nailed it. We learn more from failure than we do from success. Right? Me personally, and just about everybody I've ever known who's been successful, you have to fail. One of the reasons why I wanted to move from Europe to the US is because the US, particularly the West Coast, is so incredibly accepting of failing, right? It allows you to take risk. It embraces failure because it asks you, what did you learn and what are you not going to do next time? So both in my personal life and in my professional life, it's progress, right? What am I learning? How am I developing? And in order to develop, I have to actually fail. Yeah. There is a concept that Malcolm Gladwell observed in his famous book about being able to have conscious practice. So musicians and athletes practice in a particular way where they work on things, learning edges, where they are failing. And they do things over and over again using what has been observed as grit. So persistence and consistence in order to be able to refine and figure out what's going wrong so they can get it right. And that principle is, again, one of the great markers of people that are successful over time, is their ability to learn out of failure. Now, I'm not suggesting that people deliberately try and fail. You want to be successful, but you have to accept that failure is a corollary of success, right? That in order to be successful, you have to fail, unless you're just gigantically lucky. Right. And I always find it hilarious that particularly HR departments set you up, right? That they expect success all the time, right? Rather than rewarding quick failure. What you want is someone who's very curious and smart and who learns a lot from failing, right? Not doing the same thing over and over again, but doing different things. Yeah. And so what's the reward? What's the incentives to be that person? Because they are going to be the best manager, leader, right, person in terms of moving on. There's little to no evidence that I've ever found that any HR function is set up in order to be able to understand that or reward that. And so careers very often, the kind of things that you and I have done are much more personal learning rather than professional learning, which I find particularly perverse in this modern environment.
What comes to mind hearing your comments, Julian, is a phrase I've heard that says, if you're not failing, you're not trying. And I'm going to twist that based on speaking with you for an hour. If you're not failing, you're not learning.
For many people, Bill, whether you're religious or spiritual, the point of life is learning. Yeah. And so part of what you want is, what am I going to learn about? Yeah. If progress is development and development is learning, then what do you want to learn? Becomes one of the really fundamental questions for anybody, right? Is it relationships? Is it a skill? Is it a context? What's the thing that pulls you forward that you're interested in?
So you touched base in a lot of different areas in answering our next and final question of the day. Talking about choosing a path, talking about moving through it, recognizing when it no longer fits, progress versus progression,
No one's coming to save you. You shared so much with us, Julian, and I'm so thankful for that. But same question everyone on the show gets at the end of our conversation, from your perspective, what's the point?
Okay. I'm going to say that the point is that it's about the journey, not the destination. So at the advanced old age, right? I'm 58. I will tell you that there is no boat, there is no house, there is no car, there is no restaurant, there is no holiday, there is no title that makes any of it worth it. And that what does make it worth it is the journey and who you're on the journey with.
Wow, I love that. And I hope everyone listening feels the same way. Because what sticks with me after speaking with you, the several conversations we've had, is how easy it is to really keep going. And especially when things are working, but it can get a lot harder to admit something's changed, either the environment, the job, the people we work with, or most often ourselves. And to realize that there's not always a clear moment, but sometimes it's just a feeling you can't shake, and there's something you can do. And that is navigate your next. I invite everyone listening to get Julian's book. It'll be in the show notes. All of his information will be in the show notes. You've helped me tremendously. I appreciate that. And I'm absolutely positive you're helping our listeners. Thank you, Julian. I appreciate it.
It's an absolute pleasure, Bill. It's been great to spend the time with you. Look forward to having chats in the future. And as you said, it's kind of up to your listeners, right? Nobody else is going to come. So whatever you want to do, it's up to you.
Excellent. Thank you, my friend.
Well, thanks for listening to What's the Point? If this conversation meant something to you, we hope you'll follow the show and share it with someone who might benefit from it. And if you know a guest with a story worth exploring, send me a message, bill@billellis.com. I'd love to hear from you. Let me know your thoughts on the show, and I'll see you next time.